Hi everyone, Jane here. Thank you for watching today. Welcome if you're new and welcome back if you're a returning viewer. Today I really wanted to do a particular technique. Sometimes when I start my projects, it might be because I have a theme in mind or a colour in mind or a medium. But today it was actually a technique. Sometimes I don't have any idea in mind, but for this one I did have sort of in my head the sort of thing I wanted to create, and I wanted to do some emboss resist using embossing powder and some inks. So I'm starting off, and I decided to do this on a tag, by the way, just because it was a nice, quick, easy thing to do. So I'm starting off with the Lemon Creation Optical Illusion stencil, and I placed it on my tag after I'd added a bit of anti-static, just to make sure the powder didn't cling where I didn't want it to. And then I squashed through some embossing ink. Now this is a clear, sticky ink that you can then put embossing powders onto, or you can use it as a watermark, or you can use it with things like chalks and pastels. Today I used it with white embossing powder, so I'm using a Superfine embossing powder. So I poured that on, tipped it off, and now I'm heating it on my high heat of my heat tool. And as soon as I see that powder turn from like a matte look to a shiny look, I move on, because I don't want to overheat the embossing powder, because otherwise I won't be able to do the resist technique. The other thing I would say is if you're embossing or using that ink onto a watercolour card, it does sink in quite quickly, so you do need to work a little bit more quicker than if you was working on a super smooth card. Then I got out some of my distress inks. I felt they were being a bit neglected. I haven't used them for a little while, so I've gone with Tea Dye, Vintage Photo and Evergreen Bough. And rather than using my little stencil brushes, I got out my blending tools with the little flat foams on the end. Now I use the flat foams when I'm using my distress inks, and I use domed foams when I'm using the distress oxides. The only reason I use different shapes of foams is because then I know which ones are for the inks and which ones are for the oxides, so I don't muddle them up, although I don't think it's the end of the world if you accidentally get one bit of ink on another, but obviously try to keep them separate if you can. So I'm starting by going in with the lightest colour, then I move on to the vintage no, sorry, I said it was Vintage Photo. It's not Vintage Photo, it was Rusty Hinge. It's because I use Vintage Photos so much, I was thinking it was that one, but it wasn't. It was Rusty Hinge. And then finally I used some of the Evergreen Bough. I was going for a sort of rusty or patinaed sort of look, because I knew that I wanted to do something industrial with this stencil in the background. I thought it was so cool. And once I had put that ink on, I'm then just wiping over the embossing. Because it's a water reactive ink, you can wipe it off the embossing, because it's basically a plastic. But then I added on some water droplets so I could lift some of that colour to make a more sort of distressed look, which is one of the fun things to do with your sort of water reactive inks, is to get those sorts of looks and effects. I wanted to add in a little bit of stamping, so I'm going with the Lemon Creation So Textured stamp set. I looked at a few different stamp sets, but I wanted something a bit bolder to start with, because when I'm stamping, I should say, with the distress ink again, because what I want to do is I want to stamp it, and then I want to be able to wipe it off the embossing so that the stamping looks like it's behind the stenciling. And you will need an ink that's going to be able to be wiped away from that embossing powder. So I wanted a bolder looking stamp to start with, because I wanted it to be able to show through the stenciling, which takes up quite a big part of the tag. But then I went with something a little bit fine. I went with the numbers that are on the same stamp set. And so the first stamping I did was with the Evergreen Bough, and then I went in with the Rusty Hinge. And I was doing it more on the edges here so that you could actually see the stamping, because otherwise, obviously, if I do too much behind where the embossing is, you're not really going to see a lot, although you do get quite a nice effect, because you get a little bit of it peeking through from the actual cardstock when you wipe it away from the embossing powder. Now, I wanted to create some sort of elements for my tag that were more like the sort of look you get when you buy 3D, oh, not so much 3D, but like die cut images already done for you that are maybe on chipboard or something like that, or on thicker cardboard. So I'm going into the Industrial Bits and Bobs book by Maremi. This is one of my favourite of her books. It's on a very thin paper because it's for doing collage. So often you will see me, I think in my last video, I was building up layers on with the collage more as a paper. So it was more of a blended look. That wasn't what I was going for this time. So I went for first of all, that little sort of boy fairy, steampunk fairy, industrial fairy. And then I was going through the book looking for a couple of other images that I could also add to the page that would sort of complement him. Now, when I'm fussy cutting, because I know that fussy cutting is something that some people do struggle with. Now, if the reason you're struggling with the fussy cutting is because of your hand health, maybe you're struggling with different conditions, and I personally also do suffer with, I have problems with my thumbs sometimes, caused, I think, through years of doing crafting, then you can use, I'm pretty sure you can use these pages on something like a scan and cut if you've got a machine like that, so that you don't have to cut them by hand. My other recommendation would be that you leave a border around so that you're not having to be so fiddly about it. But also getting scissors that are comfortable for you. Now, for me, I like small scissors. I go with the scissors I use are the Tim Holtz snips. I like the smallest ones when I'm doing fussy cutting. Some people find that bigger scissors actually make it easier for them, but I find the small ones. But these do have a serrated blade, so if you don't like that look, then choose different ones. But you can get specific scissors that have more comfortable handles, so I would look into that as well. Now, I wanted this to be more of a die cut look, so I am sticking my image onto some very thin card. Now the card is like a super smooth one, and then I let them dry. I left a little bit of an edge around the image to start with when I was sticking it down, just so that when I cut it out I knew that I was getting all the glue and the card in the right places. And then I'm going in, and for this particular one I am cutting close to right on the edge of the image. One of my top tips for fussy cutting would be do it as it is comfortable for you. So you will often when I am fussy cutting, I don't just start at a point and go all the way around the image in that direction. I chop and change. I might start in one place, and then if that's finding that is now getting a bit uncomfortable, I'll come in from another angle. So move whatever it is you're cutting to suit you. The other thing I would say is get rid of a lot of the bulk. I get rid of a lot of the bulk before I start, so I'm not having to fight with all of the excess card or excess paper. And the other thing I would say is if you've got bits on there that really are too tricky, sometimes you might even be able to cut something out, but then once you've cut it out, you find that it's so thin that it doesn't even look very good. So cut off the bits that you don't want on there. No one's going to know apart from you. Obviously, you will know if it's me, if I've made a video, but in the normal world, that's not YouTube, nobody's going to know what you've cut off. Nobody's going to know what that image looked like. And the other thing that I do every time when I cut images out and I know that they're going to be raised from the page, I don't do this so much if it's going to be stuck directly to the page, but if I'm doing something like this where it's on card, I will go around the edge and just cover those raw edges. That will also help if you've missed little bits. If you've left bits of white card, colour them in, and you don't need to worry. And between his little legs there is a little sort of landlocked piece that I could have cut up from the bottom and cut out, but it was so tiny it would have been tricky, so I just went over that with a little bit of that ink as well, just to blend it in. So you don't have to, there are ways around having to cut out every single little thing. Now, I'd already done the light bulb that was going to dangle from the top, and I'd also done the little, I'm not sure, sort of light bulb on a base So I was sort of trying to make it echo the top, and I wanted the first light bulb to sort of be flat to the tag. So I have used an acrylic glue for that because it is going over embossing. So you're going to need to use something that will stick hard to like a plastic surface. So something like an acrylic glue is going to be good for that. Then I wanted to raise up my little fairy boy, and I also wanted to raise up the light bulb from the bottom. So I'm using these foam pads. Now I buy my foam pads in 3mm, which is quite thick, because if I'm going to raise something up on foam pads, I want to be able for it to be seen that they're raised up on foam pads, is I guess what I'm saying. So I also buy bigger foam pads that I can then cut down, because I find that if I've got lots of little foam pads, it just drives me mad. And I'd rather have a bigger foam pad so that if I've got a big image, I can just stick a couple on and it's going to be done, and then cut them when I need them, than the other way around. So then I'm using one of these labels from the Tim Holtz collection. This is the Thoughts set, and I've gone with Choose to Shine, and I thought that could also act as a little bit of a grounding for my little boy there. He is a fairy, I think, isn't he? Because he's got wings. So it was a little bit too long, so I just trimmed the edges off slightly. And again, even though it is an adhesive back to this sticker, and they are very sticky because they're quite new, because it's going over that embossing, I added a little bit of the glue again, just to make sure that it would stick down. Actually, I didn't stick that. I just realised I didn't put the one at the bottom on foam pads in the end, did I? I was going to, and then I changed my mind and stuck that one flat as well. So you see here, I am adding some glue to my foam pads. That is not so much for stickiness's reason, although it will help. It's also because sometimes if you stick foam pads and tape directly down, they do tend to stick straight away. If you add a little bit of glue, you get a little bit of slippy wiggle time, and if you suddenly realise you've put it in the wrong place, it does give you a moment just to pull it back up off the project. I felt that it was missing some splatters, and because I had just that black sentiment in there and no other black in there, I thought I would add some black splatters with the Winsor & Newton ink. After this, I did actually manage to smear it a little bit, so that wasn't great, but I just left it as it was. And so here's the final piece. So if you have enjoyed this video, do please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already subscribed, do please hit that subscribe button. I also do now have memberships, one membership level activated, and at the end here you will see my latest members. So thank you very much, and a big shout out to all those for their support. And until the next time, bye bye.